Welcome to the 11th episode of the My Vision Born Show on the Abdel Russell Experience podcast. On episode number 10, I went into detail on how conflicted I was on the presidency of Barack Obama. If you've been following the My Vision Born Show, you know during this time period, I just relocated back to New York City in 2008 during the financial crisis and the housing bubble. Not to mention, I was fresh off of a divorce. Needless to say, I was in full reset mode. My experience in Central Florida was amazing. I learned that all the talk about the state of Florida being racist was hyperbole and left-wing propaganda. But maybe that's just my experience. After all, I only spent time in 4 cities in the state of Florida. The state just seemed to have a certain consistency in my opinion, and maybe that's because the governor was elected twice, and any elected official that spends 2 terms in office pretty much can shape that political landscape however they see fit. And while I was in Florida, Governor Jeb Bush was who was holding office. Anyway, back to relocating to Brooklyn. Obviously, if you've been following the podcast, you know that my welcoming to Brooklyn was my car being broken into and gutted out. Needless to say, I was forced to sell my car, and I did. And it was back to taking public transportation, which is something I had not done in years. Hello, Brooklyn. As I look back on that, I realized taking public transportation gave me the opportunity to really examine a city that I once lived in and that I grew up in and see it for what it was when I came back. I'm not exaggerating when I say the smell in the city was something that I didn't expect. Maybe I didn't notice it while I lived in the city prior to moving to Florida, but it was definitely noticeable when I returned back to the city. Something else that I noticed that you might think I'm crazy for saying is that it seemed like the Tomboys disappeared. Remember the term Tomboys? Maybe it's just something from my era, but let me refresh your memory or give you a lesson. A tomboy was a girl that grew up kind of rough, still had some kind of feminine qualities to her. She didn't have a lot of female friends. She mostly hung out with the guys, played with the guys, and maybe thought she was a guy. She was basically rough around the edges, but she still knew she was a girl, and she conducted herself as such, but she knew how to throw a punch. She can definitely put most guys in a headlock. Okay, I digress, but what happened to the Tomboys? It seemed like during the 3 short years I spent in Florida, all the Tomboys in New York City turned into full-blown lesbians. And let me restate the fact, I have no issues or problems with lesbians or gays. Wait a minute, isn't lesbian a term for gay? Well, lesbian's the term for female gays. So if lesbian's the term for female gays, what's the male term for gays? I never thought about that. Have you? I don't know where this is going, but let's get back to the Tomboys. What happened to the Tomboys? Under Barack Obama's presidency, it seems like all of the Tomboys vanished and disappeared off planet Earth. And I chuckle when I say that because it's something that I always pondered about since returning back to New York City. Can someone do me a favor? Visit my website at abdelrussell.com and send me a message if you know what happened to all the Tomboys. Fun fact, many Tomboys grow up to be drop-dead gorgeous and are some of the most feminine women in their adult years. Guess all they need is just time to discover themselves, right? But don't get it twisted, they can still throw a punch and put you in a headlock, and they make great boy moms. They might not do so well if they have daughters though. The relationship is kind of awkward. Trust me, I'm speaking from experience, because during 2008 is when I met my current wife, who I dated for several years before getting married to in 2019, and watching the interaction between her first child, who just happened to be a girl, was very interesting. Not only was her first child a girl, but she was a girly girl. So the years of watching these two interact was beyond entertaining. Here's some quick advice to all the husbands out there who end up marrying women who used to be tomboys. Every now and then, remind her to model the behavior of the woman she wants her sons to end up marrying. All I can say is, those words will work wonders. You can thank me later. But shout out to all the tomboys out there, whether you're retired or you're extinct. I truly wonder sometimes how tomboys feel about lesbians. I'm definitely naming the title of this episode, How Do Tomboys Feel About Lesbians? Maybe all the tomboys became transgender, which is more than likely what happened considering all the policies that President Obama put in place when it comes to gender identity. But what do I know? I just left the city in 2005, came back in 2008, and saw a totally different New York and a totally different United States of America because Americans elected the first black president of our country, which, as I mentioned prior I was conflicted about. Obama was not only a model president, he was a model black president. The guy was well polished, well spoken, intelligent, checked all the boxes as far as I could see, but I hated most of his policies. Nonetheless, Obama's presidency confirmed everything that I wanted this country to be. While she's not perfect, there's a reason why the entire world is coming to the United States of America, like my family did in the late 70s and early 80s, and like the entire world continues to do even in 2025. One of the things that frustrate me about skeptics when it comes to the topic of the United States of America is that they judge the country based upon its past and not where it's headed. Anytime I'm face to face or I engage with someone who has a completely different view of this country than I do, I always ask them one question: is America in the same place it was 60 years ago? You judge people based upon their long-term history. You judge countries based upon their short-term history. The reason for this is because people can change how they think or act in one day, but the next day can go back to what they used to do. A country's like a big ship. It takes a lot for that country to change, turn, or redirect itself. This is why you judge a country by its short-term history, in other words, where it's headed. But regardless of how I feel, that is just my opinion. And thank God in the United States of America, you're all entitled to your own opinion. Just don't try to enforce it on somebody else's. Like I frequently say, this is America. You get most of what you want and have to tolerate some of what you don't want. This balance is called freedom. You're free to believe that you're a dog, cat, or a squirrel, and I'm free to believe that you are not. If I am not allowed to believe that you're not what you say you are not allowed to believe what you say you are. Sounds good to me. The fact that my original political party disagrees with everything that I just said is the number one reason why I am currently a Republican. Live and let live. That's my philosophy. And from the bottom of my heart, I truly feel this is one of the reasons why I love this country so much. Just because I disagree with how you're living your life doesn't give me the right to interrupt or disrupt your life. That freedom is ultimately what needs to be protected at all costs in this country. And it's the number one reason why I became a citizen of this country in the mid-2000s. If you're wondering why it took me so long to become a citizen after arriving in 1984, I don't know. Maybe I felt like I didn't have to prove myself. But after my first son, Aaron, was born in 2010, my priorities and perspectives changed immediately. How was I going to tell this boy how much I love this country and how he's lucky to be born in this country and I wasn't a citizen? Our children grew up seeing flags everywhere. All of our homes, flags on the back of every BMW we've ever driven, flags in our shoes, large flags in our children's rooms. Don't even let me mention t-shirts. They were everywhere. All of this pride and me not being a citizen of the United States of America would have been crazy. And so I took the oath, got my naturalization, and that was it. For the next 3 months, you couldn't tell me I wasn't Captain America. That's right, a second-generation immigrant from the Caribbean was Captain America for about 3 to 5 months. Instilling this pride in my children I found to be something very important, because as a second-generation immigrant from another country, I realized one profound thing. There was no way that I was going to allow my children to grow up in this country, the country they were born in, and not be a part of the fabric of its existence. You can blame this mindset on what I call the immigrant experience, or more specific, my immigrant experience. From what I saw and realized after arriving in this country and noticing the difference between the Black Americans that were born in this country versus the Black people that arrived in this country, aka immigrants. And what clearly stood out to me was there were many Black Americans that lived and acted as if they were in a foreign land, even though this was their country of birth. And I identified the main cause of this was due to the trauma and the experience of their previous generations, as it applied to slavery, racism, and many of the other negative historical experiences that happened in this country. So I get it, and as a grown man, I understand the impact that these experiences and historical facts can have on a people. But one thing I was not going to do as a father was let my children grow up in their country feeling as if they were other. That is absolutely not my parenting style. I am here to set my children up for success, and planting a specter or idea of some random racist person deep into their developing psyche who they might or might not meet is ultimately setting them up for failure. I would rather empower them and tell them about how great they are, about their history, family lineage, their genes, and be the ultimate example of what manhood looks like. So if or when that day comes when one of my 3 sons bumps into a jerk or bigot, you won't have to worry about my boys. Worry about the bigot. And that's the difference between equipping your children with a shield versus a sword. Pray they don't have to use the sword. But that's my parenting style. You do what you think is best. This is America, the United States of America. You get most of what you want, have to tolerate some of what you don't want, and that's what's called freedom, my friends. Thank you for tuning in to the 11th episode of the My Vision Born Show on the Abdel Russell Experience podcast. Until next time, you are blessed. Enjoy your freedoms. Peace.